that we love questions from the audience. So you can start commenting your questions now, or you can also add them as we go. I'll be right back on to welcome our guests to the show. Thanks for meeting us for coffee.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is my last live show for at least a few weeks. I'm expecting to have a baby any day now. It's just a waiting game. So I'm going to take a few weeks off and we're going to have to skip an episode or two. So thanks for listening in. I do have a second podcast releasing this week on Thursday. I usually don't pre-record podcasts. I had to pre-record it because I just couldn't guarantee I wouldn't have a baby by then. And so I was a little nervous we'd miss it. And it's an awesome special edition episode around helping you plan for Manifest. And since Manifest is coming up in just a couple weeks, I really didn't want to miss the window to try to get some information out there for you guys. So if you are hanging out this week, planning to attend Manifest, still unsure if you want to attend Manifest, and wanting some more information, I had the amazing Katie Date from Connective, which is the company that runs Manifest, on and we had just a great conversation about all things Manifest, how you can make the most of it. Guys, there are going to be almost 7,000 people at this conference, which makes it really impactful. You can connect with a lot of people, but it can also get overwhelming if you go into it with no game plan. Do not go into this huge conference with no game plan. So we talked about how to game plan it. I'm obviously do sales and so consulting. And so talked about it from kind of a sales perspective, how to get ROI. Good morning, Melissa. Thank you so much. So happy you're here today. So again, if you're considering Manifest, if you are definitely already attending and registered for Manifest, give that podcast a listen. It might give you some good ideas, some thoughts. She tells us what's new, what to expect, all the cool things. Today also is the last day for they extended the hotel room block. So if we want to talk about going to Manifest, we want to talk about saving money. It's at the Venetian, not a super cheap hotel without a room block. So today's your last day to take advantage of the room block. Please do that if you haven't already gotten your hotel accommodations set. And then in the comments, I put my discount link to save you $200. The prices are going up for the last time on the 23rd. So you have 3 more days to see if anyone else from your team needs to get registered, if you need to share it with a friend, if they need to get registered, so that you guys can all save a couple $100 on your registration still. And then after that, prices go up to on-site prices, and no more opportunities to save. So don't be that person. Okay. That's also my last conference announcement for quite a while, because I obviously have to take a break in the spring conference season with a little one at home, and then we'll be back talking conferences at some point mid-year to gear up for the fall conference season, which is always a busy one for myself and for the podcast. Without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring my guest on this morning so that he can introduce himself and we can get going with an awesome conversation today. So, good morning. How are you doing, Forrest?
Good morning. Nice to see you bright and early. Pacific time.
Yes, bright and early. You're such a saint for doing this when you're Pacific time and I'm Central. So, start your morning right at 7 a.m. getting into prep for a podcast. I appreciate you for that.
All good. The sun's up now, so we're good to go.
The sun just came up, so we got some light in there. That's great. Well, for anyone who doesn't know you, would you please introduce yourself, and please feel free to tell us a little bit more about your background and kind of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so hey to everybody listening in. My name is Forrest Dougan. I am the Senior Director of Economic Strategy and Data Science at OPENLANE. So I ended up at OPENLANE in the wholesale automotive space a couple years ago, and have been running kind of anything advanced analytics for our group. We're a publicly traded company. A lot of people don't know what wholesale automotive is. So I certainly didn't until somebody explained it to me during the recruiting process, and I said, of course that exists. Was kind of my reaction. But basically, when you take a car to a dealership, you trade in a Toyota, and let's say you're buying a Jeep. That Jeep dealer doesn't necessarily want a Toyota on the front line of their lot. They don't make as much money from service, if they make any. There's different credit conditions with their finance teams. So they can either choose to sell that car at retail, which they may or may not want to, or they can take that car to a wholesaler, which is basically an auction for used vehicles, and they can get your older Toyota to a Toyota dealer or to an independent dealer. Obviously, that's a physical good. It's a 3,000-pound car. So there's a bunch of services that are attached to it that we also help out with. Inspections, transportation, reconditioning services. There's a big gamut of companies that we run, and we help out our dealership customers. So I guess, how did I end up in wholesale automotive? I spent a lot of time throughout my career doing data science work in two-sided marketplaces. So you think auction is effectively a two-sided place. Two-sided marketplaces are just fancy Silicon Valley speak for connecting buyers and sellers, as like a brokerage or a carrier would. So I graduated with a degree in economics and math, and then went into valuation consulting. So trying to determine fair market prices for goofy goods or mergers, transactions. We did some work for how much AT&T cell towers were worth. It's a thing to figure out. And did some fun work with horse farms that were technically part of the company's portfolio and not the owner's portfolio. And then moved into doing supply chain analytics for a big company out of Missouri, and then went into the startup land. Before Zoom became very cool, I worked for a company called Varsity Tutors, which is now traded as Nerdy, where we were connecting via digital tutoring services, students and educators, so that you could be in LA and you could get a Harvard math tutor. Then went to Zillow for a few years, connecting buyers and sellers for real estate, and worked on the Zillow Offers program, specifically within their marketing lens, trying to use data science, advanced analytics to grow their customer base for buying and selling homes. And then landed at OPENLANE in kind of the height of the pandemic, and have been here for going on 4 years, and really liking the automotive space. It's super cool, super interesting people, and lot to learn about the intricacies of a really old industry that's really digitizing itself right now. And with all that digitization brings more data. And the more data I get, the happier I am. So happy to talk auto and the health of the retail consumer and all the stuff we look at today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have a couple questions I think I want to get into that are probably specific to your sector. I'll have to ask some questions about the automotive space because it's one we really don't talk about much here. But to start, I know that, in conversations with you before, and even just from your background, something that you have always had to kind of closely monitor is the state and kind of the health, if you will, of the US consumer and how that impacts your industry. And I mean, obviously the state of the consumer impacts a lot of industries, ours included in trucking and logistics. So I would love to start this conversation by kind of getting your insights and just breaking down the current state of the US consumer and how things have been going, how things are trending, and get all your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So we, like you said, we track the health of the retail consumer very closely. When you're choosing to buy a new car, you're choosing to buy a used car, you're choosing not to buy a car, to delay a purchase. It all comes down to the health of your wallet, your bank account, your confidence in the future of your household income and your household spending. And so if I were to kind of put a bow on it, I would say that the health of the retail consumer in the US is bifurcated. It's kind of going in two different directions. And I think there was a coined term a couple of years ago, they call it a K-shaped economy, where the top part of the K, things are going well, things are getting bigger. The bottom part of the K, things are stressful and declining. And we've observed kind of a building of that trend that already existed, an expansion of the steepness of that K, if you will. Sorry for putting my hands in front of my face.
I talk with my hands, but they're down here, so.
Yeah, I need to fix that habit. A steepening of the arms of that K over the last year or so. What does that mean in terms of the automotive space? People with good credit, stable income, good jobs are really doing well. So the types of brands and purchasing decisions that are happening for, let's just grab the top 10%. Your German imports, your, kind of flashy cars, leather trim, that type of stuff. Things are going really well in that space. On the bottom half with your cloth trims, your, kind of lower end Japanese imports, Koreans are struggling a little bit. A lot of those, those are the customers. That's not necessarily saying those auto manufacturers are struggling,
right?
Because they can manage.
I find this so interesting because it's
base.
Like we can evaluate how and like the types of cars people are buying, the decisions they're making, and I feel like that has such much bigger implications too than just their car choice. Like it's giving us really that insight look into their overall confidence, financial position, how they're
absolutely feeling. And particularly what we've kind of observed is, everybody's saying like things are getting more expensive. But when you zoom in on specific industries, cars have gotten really expensive. I don't know if you've been on a car lot or if you're not a gearhead and you're not searching for a car, you might not necessarily realize it. But the average price of a new car right now is at or just above $50,000. Whereas going into 2019, we were looking at prices in the $24,000, $25,000 range. So cars are really expensive. And there's a lot of factors that have led into that. There was the demand increase going into and through COVID. We were printing a bunch of money, quantitative easing. There's a bunch of macroeconomic policy factors that went into people having a lot more money. So what do? You say, yeah, I'll buy a car. Why not? Then there was a supply shock. So we had all the supply chain issues. So demand went up, supply went down. What happens? Econ 101, prices go through the roof. And we've seen stabilization of those prices. So we're not necessarily seeing the prices continue to rip. But we're at this new plateau where vehicles are much, much more expensive. And then when you add on interest rate hikes that have happened over the past few years, the cost and the affordability of your standard mid-size sedan is is a lot more than it was a couple of years ago. And we're seeing particularly people with tighter budgets having to make more and bigger trade-offs when it comes to getting in and out of a specific vehicle. So what does that mean? It's more stressful at the middle income and the lower income levels than it is at the top of the market right now. And that's kind of permeating and filtering through a lot of different decisions that folks are making about their purchases, car and non-car, right? If your auto payment goes from $400 to $800, you've got to figure out where that additional $400 is coming from, and that's a tough decision for a lot of households.
Yeah, I think this whole principle right now, because what you're talking about, like the average cost of a car now has changed drastically, and we've seen the same with a home. For a first time home for a lot of people, the cost has gone up dramatically. And so we have a lot of these like big financial decisions that consumers are trying to grapple with. And I had asked you a question the other day. I made a note of it because something you said stuck out to me, so I wanted to be sure to come back to it today. You were telling me a little bit about the difference between disinflation and deflation, because I
Yeah.
asked you, like, are we going to go back to 2020? Are we going to go back to, like, you said the car price has gone up from 25,000 to 50,000. Like, do we just accept that as baseline now? And we have to figure out if consumers can start navigating that, or are we hoping to see things go backwards and go back down in price? Like, tell me a little bit more about the idea of disinflation or deflation, what those would mean.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a nitpicking economist term. So I'll try to define it for everybody here. Disinflation is when the inflation rate is positive but going down. So you have an inflation rate of 3%, and you want to get that disinflated to 2%. That's kind of the target federal funds rate. There's been some commentary from folk at the Federal Reserve Board of maybe that's 2.5% to 3% now, but 2% is kind of the textbook answer for where you want inflation. We've been running hot, 3, 4, 5% over the last couple of years. That's too high. Deflation is when the cost of goods actually start declining and going negative. So rather than reducing but staying positive, prices go negative. In order to get back from today's prices to 2019, you would have to get negative prices, so deflation. Deflation is generally associated with a recession. So prices start coming down. That is highly stressful for the economy in a myriad of ways. We generally, if you're rooting for the US economy, if you're rooting for the American consumer, you're rooting for your neighborhood, your family and friends, you don't want to root for a recession. So as bitter of a pill as it is, we don't want prices to go back to 2019 broadly. In certain sectors, you can have deflation without affecting everybody. But I would gesture or kind of position that like these price levels, particularly, broadly, are kind of the new normal. You might have some certain sectors where we might go from, let's say this, namesake $50K, we might get the average price of a new car down to $40K due to automotive manufacturers making trim level decisions. Cloth seats instead of leather, a 6-inch tablet screen instead of a 12-inch tablet screen, some of those kind of like edge case to bring the marginal price down. But the price levels we're seeing are probably, broadly speaking, the new normal. And we're going to have to wait for in the same way that wages and income kind of ramped ahead of the cost of goods and people were buying a bunch of stuff and freight was ripping and deliveries during COVID. As prices kind of overshot that, we're going to have to wait a little bit for wages and the labor market to adjust and catch up to that situation, so things feel more normal, even if the nominal price on a box of cereal is $5 instead of $3.
Yeah. And I think that like the glory days, if you will, of the 2020, 2021 years is kind of what you described, where prices hadn't gone up yet, but wages were starting to accelerate very quickly. You had all of the like pandemic credits and cash bonuses, you know, hitting the consumer. And so for a couple of years, like consumers really did have spending power because they really did have more money. Like we accelerated wage growth and income faster than we did cost of goods. But then what we saw after that is cost of goods, obviously because of the shock, started to go up. And now we've gotten to this point here in 2026 where prices are much elevated, much different. And we continued to see hot wage growth throughout most of the last several years, actually. When all the talk was about like the soft landing and how are we going to like stick this and avoid recession, it was all focus was on, we need to kind of calm down the labor market. We need the labor market to calm down because wages are still growing. It's not sustainable. And so I feel like we're starting to see that calming, but like for most intents and purposes, they would claim that the labor market, that wages kept pace with the cost of goods. I think maybe now what we're seeing is like that's not so much true for the lower part of that K, or that's where it's harder, more stressful right now. And that's where we're starting to see that things kind of break down.
Yeah, and so the data that we tend to look at in terms of kind of understanding the automotive space, starting at the health of the retail customer, you look at the headline number, wage growth is 4% or 3.5%, whatever it is. And my instinctive reaction is I always go into the quintiles, which are, 0 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60% of earners. And what we actually saw through COVID was the 0 to 20 and 20 to 40% earners saw the highest wage growth over the last like 10 or 15 years. So they ranked way above the wage growth of the top half, but that volatility to the upside starting in 22, 23 also became volatility to the downside. And so that kind of bottom 40% is hit the brakes the hardest on their wage growth after accelerating the fastest. And a lot of the distress that, you kind of hear about the labor markets is particularly felt in like the lived experiences of folk operating kind of that bottom half of the K, where they shot up, 1.5, 2x the wage growth of the top half. And then they slammed on the brakes and they're now back below the wage growth of that top half. So that kind of whipsaw on the bottom half of the K is particularly evident in the data when you go kind of below the headline. Just another example of the dozens or hundreds of metrics you could use to say like K-shaped economy is America right now. And that turns into a lot of different decisions in terms of what cereal you buy, where you're shopping, how much you're shopping for. Do you do the DoorDash thing instead of, pick up for your Thai food? There's a Thai restaurant just up the street that I go to way too often.
But I may support a little too much.
Yeah, exactly. They gave our house a gift for Christmas, and I felt some kind of way about that.
That's pretty funny. Not sure how to feel about that.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, thank you so much.
Support local. So I'm curious. I think something that you guys can probably track that gets talked about a lot in general economics and big data is people like to look at like credit card delinquencies, and we like to watch for those rates going up to kind of gauge the health of the consumer. But you guys are in an interesting position where you probably have like delinquencies and repossession claim data for vehicles, which would be an indication of financial strain. How has that been trending, over the last year in comparison to years prior?
Significantly elevated. So the repossession claim happens kind of after a delinquency starts, right? So there's a holding period, and there's like legal conditions around that holding period. You have 30 or 60 days to get good on your arrear payment, that type of stuff. But we have access to data that lets us see the pre-repossession filing claims by the credit lenders, and those kind of lining up to the types of vehicles, the make models that fall on either side of that K-shaped recovery are up. Those 30-day and 60-day repossession requests or claims are up 14-15% year on year overall.
Oh, wow.
So at a particularly sizable level on the actual delinquency side, claims are up, anywhere between 10 and 15%. We're kind of touching 2010 levels of auto loan delinquencies. So when you think about where are the customers pulling back on their spending if they become extremely distressed in terms of their budget, you're going to start at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Food, shelter, clothing. And you're going to defer payments on stuff where you think you can defer or you have switching opportunities in the future. So auto loan payments, delinquencies, repossession trends are kind of a canary in the coal mine for the US consumer, because the customer will say, I got to pay my mortgage. I got to feed my kids.
Right.
I got to make sure that we have clothes for, in the Midwest, I think you guys are at like 9 degrees today, something like that. It's super cold. My family's in
20,
Missouri.
20 right now.
20.
So.
Okay. Balmy day.
Beautiful.
So you're going to defer that auto loan payment as much as you can,
Right.
with the understanding that if you do get that car repossessed, if you do have to, give up that car, you can switch out your $30,000 car for a $10,000 car and still get where you need to within your budget constraints. And that's really what we're observing, is that there is an increased kind of trading down behavior or trading even behavior. Even when people are making the same or a little bit more money, they're choosing to drive their cars longer. They're choosing to not switch their cars as much. And that's,
and wouldn't you also say, like, I think uncertainty and sentiment drives a big part of that decision making
100%.
too. We've seen really bad consumer sentiment. We're living in very kind of uncertain economic conditions, and all the headlines are changing on us. So I think, yes, obviously the delinquencies and stuff would be people who are starting to struggle with that. But then that doesn't surprise me that people want to stay in their vehicle longer, just because you're like, I don't know what's going on. At least I'm set. I know I can handle this payment. I know my interest rate is what it is. And I feel like there's a lot of like hesitation to take any type of risk or change on right now.
Yeah, there's some really interesting data if you're a total data jockey like I am. If you go into the Michigan Consumer Survey, once a month they do a huge PDF printout that's like 150 pages long that takes that top line number and splits the data a bunch of different ways. And there's actually some specific questions regarding, is now a good time to buy a car? Very, very few people. And then they split that between right now and future expectations. And we're seeing a lot of distress in, is now a good time to buy a car versus will the future be a good time to buy a car? And a bunch of the reasons given around that are basically like, prices are bad, but they're not going to get better. Or I don't think that interest rates are going to benefit me if I delay my purchase by, 30 days, 60 days, 6 months, something like that. And so people are very hesitant about the future. And that hesitation, that uncertainty is going to generally cause people to pull back on their things that they consider discretionary for their purchases.
Well, talk to me about interest rates.
Yeah. That's exactly where I was going.
You were probably going there, but do interest rates, we're seeing the Fed, like they made some quarter point cuts. Like we're unsure if they're going to continue to cut. A lot of people think they will make some, cuts in 26, but how much does that actually benefit consumer decisions on, discretionary spending or goods spending, and how quickly?
Yeah, so the automotive market, kind of like housing, the closer you get to, putting more of a purchase on credit, the closer you're tied to interest rates, the more the market's going to move with interest rates. In the automotive space, we've seen the kind of reduction in the federal funds rate that's not really in a significant manner turning into reductions in the auto loan interest rates, enough to really move the needle on the monthly payment. The reason we kind of look at is why the federal committee is choosing to cut the interest rates. They're pointing at distress in the labor markets. They're pointing at sticky inflation, while choosing to do a 25 basis point cut instead of a 50 basis point cut. And what that's kind of signaled to the credit facilitators is there's an increased risk premium that they want to put on that car. It's a definitionally depreciating asset that needs a monthly payment, and they're saying, hey, the labor market's stressed. That monthly payment that is the more discretionary payment versus your mortgage, I'm going to charge a little bit more versus what I'm seeing from the Fed. So we've seen a little bit of a pull down in the automotive interest rates, but that risk premium versus the federal funds rate is actually increased over that same period, which to the end consumer means that
I find this so interesting. We've all been waiting on interest rates to come down to unlock consumer spending. And essentially, because of the way the Fed is now behaving around interest rates, as they're slowly pulling them down because they're concerned about the ability of the U.S. consumer to maintain, it's actually kind of like you just said, it signals, hey, if you're lending to these people, maybe be cautious, or the risk is a little higher, because overall, the reasons we're cutting are not because everything's so great and positive and under control and everybody's happy, right? So it's like there might be some stress on wages. There might be some stress in the labor market. Inflation's still a little bit sticky, so we got to be cautious. And so all these things aren't necessarily signaling to the lenders to just start cutting your interest rates and giving money out there.
Exactly. I mean, it's still a competitive environment for interest rates.
Sure.
So I expect that as the federal funds rate comes down, if it continues to come down, that there should be some downward pressure, as long as the labor market holds kind of the weird hovering pattern that it's in right now, where there's no fire, no hire is kind of the catchphrase that I've heard. So as long as things kind of remain in stasis, prices are probably going to remain the same. Affordability is not going to improve greatly unless you're opting for a trim level down. Or what we're going to see, or what we're going to continue to see, is folk just, making that decision between new car, used car, and no car. And so we've actually observed, despite what people say about the, they don't make them like they used to, the average age of a car on the road has actually gone from 8 to 10 years to 10 to 12 years over the last, since COVID. Basically, a lot of the complaints you get are, my touchscreen is broken, my whatever, but the engine still works, right? So people are leaving their cars on the road longer. They're continuing to drive them further, and they're kind of opting increasingly for that. Like, I'll just drive this car, and that's turning into older cars on the road. At the end of the day, the challenge there in the automotive space is that, with a combination of the supply issues, tariffs, that type of stuff, when you zoom in on specific sectors, inflation was high over the last couple of years. It's coming down. It's still a little sticky. It's very sticky, higher than the overall average in the automotive supplies sector. Those are goods that get moved around a lot, both on assembly and repair. And the annualized inflation on those kind of chips and brake calipers and whatnot that go into the thousands of parts that assemble an entire vehicle have been inflating at like anywhere between 6 and 12% a year over the last couple of years. So you end up with this really tough situation when somebody kind of needs a new car or wants a new car, or they get in an accident, is the cost to repair the vehicles, both from a labor and wages side of the technicians that we have a massive shortage of, and the parts themselves are both rising much greater than the cost of a banana. So the customer who's making that automotive decision is in a really tough situation where it's actually much more expensive to stay in the car they're in, but it's also way more expensive to get into a new car. So things just feel expensive, and they feel expensive because they are expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's how a lot of people feel right now, is that things just feel expensive. I want to ask you one more question around, just around the state of the consumer. I believe they have begun the wage garnishments for student loan repayments for people who were essentially defaulting on student loans. And so I was just curious if you guys have seen, kind of were watching that, have been able to measure an impact of that on consumers, because like we talked about, you might be making a car payment right now that you don't, it might be the first thing that you give on if you had to, but then all of a sudden throw in a $200 a month student loan repayment that you hadn't been planning into your budget. Have you guys seen this show up in any way yet?
Yeah. We can kind of do some napkin math. That the garnishments and repayments came back in April, May, June timeframe, if my memory serves me correctly. And we're certainly anticipating effects. So the average student loan payment was anywhere $200 to $400. There's about 50 million borrowers in the U.S. And the latest data I saw was that about 10 to 12% of folk are delinquent on those payments in some fashion or form. So that's about 5 million people. But if you think about 5 million of those 50 million, right? If you think about who is sitting on student loans, it's 22-year-olds to 45-year-olds, right? So it's that prime income earner, it's the prime customer. It is most affected by those delinquencies, those credit impacts. We talked a little bit earlier about housing supply, kind of the millennials, older Gen Z, younger Gen X, are kind of who that is right now. So let's call it 25 to 45. There's much less home purchasing decisions going on due to prices and supply. And so a lot of times the average consumer isn't really like keeping a super tight pulse on their credit score. The average hit to their credit score of folk who go into the student loan delinquency and take that discount on their credit score is about 140, 150 points. So if you're not buying a home, you're not, logging into your bank app and looking at your credit score every month or every quarter or whatever, you're probably not aware that you had a 700 credit score when you bought your car in 2022 at the kind of lower prices versus what we see now. You go to trade that vehicle in or buy new, and suddenly, you're delinquent, but you haven't looked at your credit score. All of a sudden, you have a 550 credit score. You were looking at a 3 to 6% interest rate. Now you're looking at a 12 to 15% interest rate. So that affordability when those student loans come back in, and then folk finally decide to go to the automotive dealer lot, there's a lot of sticker shock going on the price on the hood. There's even more sticker shock going on for quite a few prime age consumers of when they get to the finance officer's desk. And we're seeing, not directly, but anecdotally, folk are worried about deals falling apart on the dealership floor because of those just pure affordability considerations around folks who have student loans or student loan delinquencies, or both. They're paying them off, but now they're paying the full freight on that, or they got behind and it's impacting their credit score. So it's kind of an across the board issue, both in terms of folk who are staying good on those student loans and folk who fell behind on those student loans.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, like, the call out on just the prime consumer would, is interesting to me. Like, yes, when you think about who drives a lot of our spending on goods, it's the same people who probably have those student loans that, came back into having to pay those. And then the credit score impact is something I hadn't considered either. Like taking a big hit to a credit score right now when it's already a higher interest rate environment to borrow, but people are borrowing. Credit cards are being opened. People are looking to have access to credit for spending in this market. So those are all really interesting kind of, I guess, impacts, if you will, of the student loans resuming. Wow, I feel like I had other questions, and as usual, I'm already 40 minutes into this. So I think that I'd love to just get any final thoughts from you on the overall economy, things. What are you most interested in watching, continuing to move into Q1 of 2026? Like, what are you finding worthwhile to keep a close eye on for your business, for general economics right now? Like, what are some data points that you think have been trending in an interesting direction that are worth us paying attention to?
That's a good question. I mean, so obviously the state of the retail consumer, there's a bevy of data that gets out there. It can get hard to interpret. But really just kind of sitting and simmering with what's going on in the labor markets, and what, kind of the trade disputes. Those have wide-ranging effects. They're kind of hard to predict, and a lot of it's in the second order or third order effects. So I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about if this then that questions around kind of the macro policy. But specific for our industry, we're really looking at supply and demand. So the demand, give it to economists to say supply and demand 15 times. But the demand side is really that retail consumer study. What's going on in wallet, how are folk feeling around the sentiment and their future expectations. So the supply side is something that we're keeping a really close eye on, particularly with the preponderance of tariffs that have come out and how that's kind of shifting supply chains and shifting production decisions. So we're really looking closely at automotive production, both final assembly and parts assemblies, across different sectors, different brands, and different types of vehicles. One thing that kind of might be interesting for the supply chain audience is when we're looking at heavy trucks, so semis, that type of stuff, buses. The demand, so sales over the last year were off about 20% versus 2024, but production over that same period was off about 50%. So we're seeing a lot of the producers really pull back on their supply. If demand pulls back or stays the same and supply reduces, you either have prices kind of where they're at right now or prices reduced. And depending on how long you keep that truck on the road, or need to replace a truck, replace some element of your fleet, we're keeping a really close eye on those kind of rental car groups, heavy car facilitators as production has really kind of declined. And we expect to have some major impacts going into the kind of cost of goods sold, both on the distributor side, the carrier side, and we'll see it sort itself out. So I'm really zoomed in on the supply side right now. Okay. Of because we have a pretty good bead, if not a confusing bead, on what's going on the demand side. And so in order to understand prices and volumes, we have to add in that supply side. And I'm really focused on how much heavy machinery is getting put out into the marketplace right now.
Do you see any reasons for optimism for recovery at some point in 2026 on the manufacturing side? Yeah,
I actually do. And this may be, they call it economics, the dismal science. So it sounds worse than it is, and I hope that it didn't come off that way. But there's a lot of small scale decisions that the OEMs can make. We kind of talked about like leather versus cloth seats. A lot of the price increases that consumers have been willing to pay for is in what I'll call gadgets on a car. Your 1972 car drove just as well without the touch screen, without the reverse camera.
Maybe arguably better.
Maybe. Yeah, exactly.
I just
You know,
bought a new car and we were like, well, we got used, but it's newer. And we were doing all the research and it's like the 2020s to 23s have noted problems with these computer issues. And you're like, ah.
yeah, exactly. So I think when you look at like the trim levels that the OEMs are choosing to produce and attempt to sell to the retail customer, there's a lot of those kind of decisions that can be made, um, not necessarily in the short term, like 30 to 60 days, but on kind of like production and assembly timelines around 6 months, 12 months, that they can adjust their trim level and their trim mix to meet where the customer's
Maybe
at, bring those prices down a little bit.
I feel like we could probably extrapolate this to other industries as well, but I think it'd be fair to say that like we've noticed that we got I don't want to say over our skis, but like when money was less of an issue the last, a few years ago, we were able to make, more high-end decisions and things were being geared around producing the latest and the greatest and selling and everybody was buying. And now we've kind of transition more into this like cautious consumer. Even if they're stable, they want to make more sensible decisions. And so it's kind of like takes time for manufacturing to reset around maybe what they feel the consumers are looking for now. And so potentially we could see, maybe we've kind of been working through that reset and we could start to kind of see some more strength returning to manufacturing and sales as we kind of start giving consumers maybe what they're more willing to purchase.
Yeah, what they need and a little bit more than what they need versus what they want and a little bit more than what they want. And so as the broader group of manufacturers, both on the interstitial goods or intermediary goods, selling to other businesses, kind of adjust to what that final purchase decision looks like. I expect that we'll see some adjustment and things will begin to ease over the next 1 to 3 years. That's my hope, right?
Right.
The great part about predicting the future is you can always say I didn't assume that when the new assumption happens. But I expect that we'll kind of whatever a soft landing looks like, that barring any big disruptive issues, that things are going to maintain in kind of the stasis and sort of slowly sort themselves out. Particularly in the automotive space. I don't want to comment on bananas or crude oil. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts today. I'm going to have to make that one my last question because we were over time. But if anybody has questions for you specifically or wants to know a little bit more about the work you do or how just kind of network and connect and hear more about what you're studying, what you're paying attention to, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you or connect?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Forrest Dougan. I think I'm probably the only Forrest Dougan on LinkedIn. If not, it's the one with my face on it. And you can also go to the OPENLANE Insights blog. We have a bunch of really fun research coming out. Obviously, a lot of that content is very automotive specific. But if you're interested in the automotive space, give me a holler on LinkedIn or check out what we're beginning to throw together and creating kind of a bigger media motion on that blog around the insights and the studies that our data science and our economics team is putting out there for the market.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. And anyone listening in, if you have questions around Manifest or still need to use that link to register, I put that in the comments for you today. Or you can reach out to me with any of your questions around Manifest on LinkedIn. If you guys don't already follow me on LinkedIn, please do so you can see more of these podcasts in the future. And then, of course, we are also on all the major podcast platforms. So you guys can follow us there. And you can actually leave like a rating and review. I can't really ask for that on LinkedIn because they don't have a way to do that. So if you listen here, you want to head to Spotify or Apple sometime and give us a rating and review, we would appreciate that. But thank you everyone for meeting Forrest and I for coffee today.